Hello, and welcome back to the Salt of the Earth podcast. This is, or should be, episode 4. Today we're going to talk about a couple things, most of them relating to possessions, wealth, greed, maybe.
And you didn't do the intro right.
I didn't.
No. Hi, welcome to the Salt of the Earth podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Pope.
He is not Thomas Pope. I am Thomas Pope. Welcome to Salt of the Earth, the Salt of the Earth podcast. I am your host, Thomas Pope, and this is your host, not Thomas Pope.
Jonathan Cobb.
And today, we're going to talk about some things. By the way, this is episode 4. Episode 4. We're going to be talking about a few things, most of them relating to possessions, wealth, maybe greed, minimalism, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so the video that I did for this Monday, or the video that I did for the earlier this week, kind of ties into that as well. The title of my video is The Temptation to Chase Wealth. And we can go over that and talk about talk about it, and then we can go into the rest of the topic, but it's all pretty much the same.
So let's jumping right in. So in that video, you mentioned that to you the kind of the striving for wealth and for attaining wealth was kind of like a metric of success or something. It was something you strived for because it was something, it proved that you were successful both to yourself and others.
That's a mindset that I fall into that I shouldn't.
Mm.
See, I recognize that it is something I deal with and I struggle with, is thinking that way. And as I kind of go over in the video, it doesn't align with Christianity, that thought process. But yes, it is something I struggle with. Sometimes I kind of get into I want to have my business succeed or make a lot of money or have money just so I can think of myself as successful, and other people will see me as successful.
And I think to some extent a lot of people think that way, not just people in general, but Christians even, is we have that idea of kind of the worldly American version of success, where you make a good amount of money, you have, toward the end of your life, you have a nice car, you have a nice house, you have lots of money for retirement, all this kind of stuff, which I guess is kind of some stuff we talked about like in previous episodes.
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, kind of what I kind of took in the 1 Corinthians 9:24 and the verse, "Do you not know that all in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it." And I kind of took that and I was like, okay, so our faith is a race, but there's other races that we could be in that we shouldn't be in, because you can only really win one race, right?
And you also compared it to the idea of like playing a game.
Yeah, a race or a game. But like trying to gain wealth could also be a race.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different things in this world that are also worldly but not wealth. It could be something else. It could be fame, other things that aren't good. Yeah,
there are a lot of different things that we can pursue, kind of purposes that we can apply to our life, going back to last week.
Yeah.
So, call it what you want, a race, a game, trying to think, call it a master, because you also referred to Matthew 6:24, where, no one can have two masters.
Yeah.
It's essentially, it's something that you're pursuing that is kind of more or less the goal of your life.
Well, I think a lot of people like to think that they can be in multiple games at once. But the purpose of Matthew 6:24, the reason I had that in the video is to point out the fact that you can't be successfully in multiple games at once.
Mm-hmm.
You may think you can. Like, many Christians probably think they can be both pursuing wealth and pursuing God, but it doesn't work.
No. We think, in theory, we think that pursuing wealth or something like that can be kind of the side gig, but more often than not, it ends up becoming the main focus, and then God becomes this, back burner side gig kind of thing, where it's just he's the one who loses time, and the pursuing wealth is still prime.
Yeah. But anyway, and the temptation to chase wealth is something that I struggle with a lot. Just because I'm kind of entrepreneurially minded. I like to think about money and numbers and
numbers getting bigger
and things like that. And so it's a very easy trap for me to fall into. But I caught myself the other day. It was like, caught myself thinking like that, and I just realized that, wow, this is directly in conflict with my walk with God, and I just needed to realize that, and I need to realize that on a daily basis, so it doesn't seep in there and try to distract me, because that's what I consider to be my biggest distraction from my walk with God is like, as a young man, I want to get a good job and make money and all that stuff, but that's pursuing wealth, and you can't pursue both God and wealth.
Mm-hmm. And it's just, I think it's not a thing you're alone in struggling with, because I know for me as well, I care a lot about money, whether I let myself always realize it or not. And I try to be, for instance, I like try to be frugal or something and save money, but even that is sometimes just a kind of a symptom of loving money and being greedy and things, Yeah. Is like, I want to have less stuff or spend less money, not because that's wise or shows that I'm focusing on something better, but actually because because I love money too much sometimes,
Mm-hmm. I mean, and obviously there is two sides of money. You can be wise with money and you can love money, and you can do both. But Christians, I believe we should be wise with money, which I consider things like saving for retirement, having money put aside, that like emergency fund, that type of thing is like, I would consider wise with money. But if you take it too far, it becomes, you can easily let that slip into loving money if you let it get too far.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of this we'll talk more in later on as we look at some verses as well.
Yeah. But actually kind of what set this off for me, something you're thinking on this morning, was I got my paycheck today, and and I had like a $350 bonus. So that was kind of nice. But then I was kind of thinking like, oh, my money's just been slipping out of my hands so fast. How can I hold on to this? Like, cause I feel like I'm having so many expenses lately, and I'm only gonna have more. And it's like, and I kind of caught myself.
Stop buying camera equipment.
Well, no, it's other things yeah. And I'm gonna need my tax refund too soon. But
uh oh.
So yeah, there's so much. It's just money coming in, and it's almost making me greedy.
Burns a hole in your pocket.
Well, not that. It's just like,
oh, it comes in and now you've got to protect it. You've got to hoard it,
Yeah, that was my first instinct. Is like, because there's different expenses I have coming up. A lot of them, a lot of ways my money is going out, and I need to be careful not to get like to get possessive.
Yeah.
Yeah, an interesting thing that somebody was talking to me or told me about one time is tithing is not only a way to help out people, but it's also an exercise to practice the art of letting go. Tithing is not just doing for other people, it's also training you to be to not be greedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's an active practice of letting go of money.
To get to that point where, starting with, whatever amount or whatever percentage that you're more willing to let go of stuff and not just, direct it all towards what you want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, in your video, you brought up the story of the rich young ruler, which one of his main problems is that he had a whole bunch of stuff that he was unwilling to part with.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Jesus those of you who are familiar with the story, what Jesus told him was, to sell it all and give to the poor. That was a very hard thing for him specifically because not only did he have a lot of stuff, but he was unwilling to let go of it. That was something that he couldn't part with.
Yeah, well, or at least that's what it implies.
Well, we don't know actually what ends up happening, but either he couldn't, or at the very least, it was very hard for him. And
yeah.
Maybe later down the road, he did end up doing it, but as far as we know, it was just, it was a very hard thing that Jesus asked him to do.
Yeah, and kind of what I got out of that is that, well, in that instance, wealth stood in the way of his walk with God. Whether or not he cleared it out of the way, we don't know. But it kind of what the synopsis to my video was that even if, as it says in Matthew 6:24, we can't serve both God and money. But even if we even if we could, we really shouldn't want to if serving money gets in the way of serving God.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what happened to this rich young man. The money ended up being a stumbling block for him. And it can be for us too easily, because if we are fully devoted to Christ, there's probably going to be situations where we feel the urge to give money to somebody, or we need to be generous. And if we pursue money, that's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be a stumbling block for us.
And we're not going to be as ready and open to that giving or sharing. It may take us time, and then the opportunity may go, or we may talk ourselves out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so when, going back, so people think that we think oftentimes that we can serve both God and money, but the very fact that we're trying that maybe is an indication that we care too much about money. Is that money is already kind of taking a more of a place than it should be,
Yeah.
And because the idea that we could do that, I mean, maybe we could, but the fact that we're thinking that we could is already kind of, it shows that there's kind of the focus is already off, Like, we shouldn't be trying to get them to work together. Like, we should be trying to just focus on the serving God part.
Yeah.
And then let the other part,
fall into place.
Take care of itself or whatever.
Yeah. Believe as Christians we part of that is being a good worker and there's other places in the Bible where it talks about providing for yourself and your family is an essential part of your faith, or if you don't do it, you're as good as a non-Christian. There's one verse about that. So obviously you obviously had to supply, but that does not mean you had to get a good job or like a high-paying job or anything like that. Does not mean you have to spend all your time working.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a priority thing, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But toward the end of your video, you make the point, which is, even if it is possible for us to be like the rich young ruler, to have a lot of possessions and wealth, and still get into heaven, it's very difficult. And as Christians, why would we even want to be in that position?
Yeah. Why would we want to risk it?
Like, if it's a danger, why do we want to be in a dangerous position,
Yeah. It would be like being a Christian and going to bars all the time and just telling yourself that won't drink or anything like that. There's just a lot of analogies like that, but you got to think of it as you're intentionally letting yourself go into dangerous situations.
Mm-hmm.
And you're endangering your walk with God by putting something that could be very dangerous. It could be a stumbling block.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's not, it doesn't mean it may never be a stumbling block for some people, but it's just a risk. Why should you take if your focus is on God? Why should you take that risk?
It's like, well, doing any unsafe behavior or something, thinking just physically, like, I don't know, driving without a seatbelt or doing something like that.
Yeah.
Is like, you could probably get by with it most of the time, maybe, but that doesn't mean it's safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's still dangerous, and it only takes the one time for it to, be too late.
Yeah.
So why would you do that? Why would you want to put yourself in a position where, maybe you'll get it, maybe you'll get through, but you're
A situation comes up, you feel like you need to give money, and then you have a struggle with the struggle is between wanting to keep your money and wanting to serve God, and that's the hard struggle to deal with, and so why would you let that struggle into your life?
right. And so maybe a lot of times, even if we get into that position, we may think that we're good, and then something comes up, and we maybe realize that we just been kind of ignoring the issue, ignoring the, our own priorities and cares and how much we cared about wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to that position and we're, maybe unwilling to give because we just kind of been deluding ourselves.
We've grown so attached to it just by nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to see. I'm not sure if you know anybody like this. I think I might know somebody that's kind of like this. And to see somebody that has a really good job and they still live or a decently good job, and they don't live above anybody else. And if they're Christians, it's cool to realize that that's because they just give more.
Mm-hmm.
I think I know somebody that's kind of like that. Not really, but they probably make well enough that they could have a significantly better house, but they don't. They just have an average house, below average.
It's not a common thing.
It's not a common thing, but I think it's really cool to see that it's just something cool to encounter if you ever see somebody like that. And you could just, if you put two together, like look at their job, look at their house, and every once in a while, and you can see like people that are like that.
But a lot more often you look at their job and then their house lines up with it, and their car lines up with it, and all their stuff lines up with it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, you maybe don't always think it, but it's like, well, I guess that makes sense, but it seems more like kind of you're maybe chasing the American dream, and tacking Christian on top of it.
Mm-hmm. It's very easy to fall into because, well, we all know how lifestyle inflation works. The joys of living in America.
Yep.
But I think, and to be financially wise, you should be fighting against lifestyle inflation, but especially as Christians. If you're going through lifestyle inflation, that should be a sign that you have more than enough money.
Mm-hmm.
And you can spare to give more. But
Well, yeah, and something we'll get into. Here, why not just get into it now? Is kind of in looking up things for this video is I found several passages that were kind of just very thought-provoking and just kind of on this topic of like, you make more money and therefore you spend more money, you live a more lavish life. Passages that go against that idea, where it's kind of like, well, what if you made more money and then your standard of living stayed the same because you already have enough? So on this idea of what is a more Christian standard of living, one that doesn't necessarily shift when we make more money or less money. In 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 through 10, and here I'll just read it. But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So, a lot of good things in that passage, but the first thing I want to notice or take note of is just at the beginning, godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. And so there's this idea that we should all be content. We should be we should be satisfied with the way that we are living. And then in verse 8, if we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. How many people actually think like that?
I know.
Nobody does. I mean, well, very few people do.
Yeah.
What it's essentially saying is, if we have the basic necessities of life, then we should be good, in theory.
That's a good verse. Wow. Yeah, it definitely does say that.
And Jonathan just realized it.
I know there's verses kind of like that. I didn't realize it was that blunt. But
Well, there are a couple others talking very much about the idea of how we are supposed to be. We are to live contently regardless of our circumstances. So this idea. So let's kind of compare two perspectives, two mindsets. The one is, money is kind of, you get a job to make money so that you can spend it on things you want, right?
yeah.
But since life has a bunch of expenses, then some of that money that you have, it's like, oh, I got to take away from some of that money for me. I have to spend some of it for groceries and rent and car insurance and this and this and that. And then it kind of gets, the way you're seeing it is kind of a negative perspective of the money for me is getting smaller, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's compare that to more of a perspective of contentment, I guess. You have this money, which you go to get a job and make money, essentially for the purpose of keeping yourself alive. And so then you get the things you need. You buy food. You have an apartment or a house or something so you can stay warm in the winter and stuff. You get your clothes that you need, a few other things that are necessary for your life. And then any money after that is just kind of extra, right?
Yeah.
It's a very different perspective of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a whereas the first one is kind of is self-focused and negative because every new expense is like, oh man, this is getting taken away from me. This one is more, it's not self-focused anymore, except, I mean, to the extent that you're keeping yourself alive. And it's more positive because as you're spending more money, as long as you're spending it for things that you need, it's like, it's fine.
Yeah. This money left over is extra. It's not
like,
it's not mine. It's not expenses. It's open.
It's open.
Available.
It's a gift. It's a privilege. It's a blessing.
Yeah.
So then that money is like, well, you're probably going to be a lot more. If you have more of this perspective, you're going to probably be a lot more open to generosity,
yeah.
to sharing and giving to people. You're going to be more ready for that. You're not going to feel guilty about buying things necessarily because, I mean, you have extra money, I guess. It's not like, lost my train of thought.
Yeah. Yeah. You won't feel guilty about buying for it because it's extra money, but.
And also, I think this is an idea I had a while ago, even before I actually read this verse, I just realized, like, if I really think about it, I go to work for food. Like, food is the reason
And rent.
that I work. And rent. An extension of it. But at its most basic concept is, like, I go to work to keep myself alive.
Yeah.
To buy food and rent. So, food and housing and stuff like that. Before even seeing this verse. And just the idea is very different because it's not one I'd ever, really thought for myself. It's not one most people think. Because we have a very different idea of what money is. We want to make more of it so that we can spend more of it on things that we want, right?
Yeah. That is. I guess I don't have the same perspective as you because I'm a dependent. So,
yeah,
that
does change things.
So it's.
But I mean, this is a perspective even I have only kind of more or less recently like envisioned,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm left with the decision, like, this new perspective seems kind of good actually, and I think I should switch to it. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But at its core, what these verses here in 1 Timothy are saying is, contentment is very important. Regardless of our circumstances, we should be content. And if we just go down the verses a little bit, it starts talking about the rich. And this goes back to what we were already talking about, where why would you want to put yourself in a position of being rich if it could potentially lead you astray? That's exactly what this is talking about. It's because, but those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. That's essentially exactly what you were talking about in your video. Is
they by longing for it, they eventually their priorities flipped, and then they wandered away from the faith.
I mean, the verses call it a snare. It has the potential of catching you, or at the very end, the wording is just kind of very, I guess, thought-provoking to say the least.
Yeah.
Some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. It's like that is the potential that riches and seeking riches or wealth has.
Yeah, well, I guess it kind of goes down to I guess it kind of relates to the thought that there's a misconception that money makes people happy, and I think as people get more money, they realize it's an illusion. It's not true. It's kind of money doesn't mean happiness. Brings a little bit. Well, what brings happiness is freedom, which freedom is not come from money really. It comes from not being dependent on money, or not being dependent on money, and it also comes from. And also, you can only have true freedom if you're free on the inside. If you know what I mean.
Right. So you can't be a slave to money.
Yeah, you can't be a slave to anything in this world.
And more than anything, that's a mindset idea.
Yeah. So freedom. So I, in my opinion, like people misconstrue having money as freedom, but money is not what gets you freedom. It's a small part of it, but most
external freedom.
Yeah,
you're not free to do what you want. Essentially, to some extent, but it's not total freedom.
Yeah, well, what money can give you, even how much money doesn't actually matter as far as the freedom aspect. It's about how you use your money and about like if you had a lot of expenses and a lot of income, you would be just as free as somebody who had a little bit of expenses, a little bit of income. The idea is you use your money wisely, so you have, and just like basic things like not being in debt, not having some emergency fund, stuff like that just gives you freedom, but that's only a small part of freedom. A large part of it is not being a slave to sin. And freedom is what gives happiness. Freedom from the sins of this world and the concerns of this world.
And when we come right down to it, if we're chasing wealth, if we're chasing wealth, then that's not chasing freedom.
Yeah, or if we're chasing wealth, that means we're a slave to wealth.
And what these verses here say about it is the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. So essentially, we're just chasing evil when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
It won't end well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I think the common misconception is money is freedom, which is, there's kind of a little bit of truth to that, but it's mostly not true. It's mostly not being a slave to the sins of this world is freedom. Mm-hmm. And being in debt is constraining, so you shouldn't be in debt.
So right now I'm thinking of one of the passages I have written down here, and it's not specifically about freedom, but when I read it, I think about like that's pretty good freedom. Is Philippians 4:11 through 13. Is Paul speaking. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. So when I read that, that's like, well, that's freedom from not only money, but from like all, essentially all earthly woes, kind of.
Yeah. Contentment is like a escape card.
Really, I mean, if you have, a decent amount of money and you can live comfortably, wonderful. If, you're in much more humble circumstances or, like Paul, sometimes just downright desperate circumstances or very lowly, going without many common things, well, that's just fine too.
Yeah. And like the freedom comes from being free from sin, and with that you can get contentment, or you can achieve contentment through grace, and then with contentment you can be happy in whatever circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
definitely, as I was looking through these verses, as I started seeing this pattern of contentment, and I know there are probably more verses than we've pointed out here talking about that, but whatever the case is, we should be content, basically. Mm-hmm. So maybe let's back up a little bit. And in your video, you talked about the story of the rich young ruler. Maybe let's talk about that some more. So maybe without reading this entire thing, the synopsis is somebody comes up to Jesus and asks him what he needs to do to inherit eternal life. And he's thinking that there's something that he needs to do, right? Something that maybe that he hasn't done yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus tells him, well, just, the commandments, do not murder, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not bear false witness, all these things. Just keep doing those. And then the guy's like, well, I have been doing them since I was young. So he has, he's been, faithfully following what he needs to do. He's been keeping the commandments. But Jesus still says that he's lacking something, right?
Yeah.
And he tells him that he needs to sell all of his possessions and give to the poor and then follow him.
And I think it's a good comparison to our own life. If wealthy people could easily, or if I'm wealthy, I can still, probably even easier almost, follow all the commandments, all the laws. I could follow the laws, but that doesn't mean I'm devoted to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But so I think Jesus saw right through that, obviously, and he's like, yeah, you're following the laws, but you're not devoted to me any more than somebody who isn't following the laws, because you see these laws, you're like, okay, I can work with that.
Or maybe you're good at keeping the laws, but there's one thing that's holding you back. It's that, you're not totally devoted to me. There's something that you would be unwilling to give up.
Yeah.
In your serving and devotion to me.
Mm-hmm. And you can't have a halfway Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus probably wouldn't want to have him if he was almost doing everything right. That's not who Jesus is wanting to have work for him.
Jesus doesn't like lukewarm tea.
Yeah. So he was like, he saw the problem, and he was gonna address the problem first thing, and he hit the nail on the head as far as he wasn't gonna beat around the bush.
He knew what this guy was lacking.
Yeah.
The guy, from this in the version in Matthew, kind of what it leads me to believe is that the guy also knew that something was lacking, but he didn't necessarily know what.
Yeah.
He was just thinking, okay, there's something that I'm missing, something that I've got to do, right? And he was maybe hoping for something easier than what Jesus said.
Well, he was probably thinking like along the same lines of the laws.
Just give me another commandment.
Yeah, just give me another commandment. I can do it, and I'll be set.
The ultimate commandment. But Jesus gives him, I guess in essence, a commandment, but it's a really hard one.
Yeah.
Especially, it was hard, and it was personally crafted to this guy. It was what would be hard for him, not for the purpose of being hard, but because that's what Jesus knew that he needed.
Yeah, he needed something to challenge, or he needed to let go, to be devoted. So I guess that, I don't know, it just is interesting to think about, because if that happened to me or you, obviously we don't have much wealth to lose, but would we be willing?
Not right away.
Not right away. It would be hard.
Probably, I would walk away like this guy. I'd be kind of sad. I'd be thinking about it for a while. Maybe or maybe I wouldn't do it,
Yeah.
But the thing to think about here is yes, we're giving up yes, Jesus was asking him to give up a lot of stuff, or in some cases, we are asked to give up stuff. But we're giving up something temporary, something in this world, but we're ultimately going to make it back. Because what Jesus says here is, go and sell all your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. So if you think about it, we're exchanging earthly treasure for heavenly treasure, And throughout the New Testament, this is kind of this idea of heavenly treasure or treasure in heaven is repeated several times as the thing that we should be seeking, not riches or wealth as we normally think of it, but a different kind of riches.
Yeah.
So moving on down the story. So when Jesus tells him to give up all his stuff, the rich young ruler, as we often call him, I don't know why. It doesn't call him at least not in this version. He walks away. He's sad. He's grieving because he owns a lot of stuff. So then Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "How hard it will be for those who are wealthy to enter the kingdom of God." And the disciples were amazed at his words, but Jesus answered again and said to them, "Children, how hard is it to enter the kingdom of God? It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." They were astonished and said to him, "Then who can be saved?" Jesus looked at them and said, "With people it is impossible, but with God it is not, for all things are possible with God." So,
yeah, it's always an interesting verse. It's always fun to think about, like, what does that even mean?
When nothing is impossible with God.
So it's like here, it's very difficult, and depending on your interpretation of the eye of the needle, difficult or impossible. But then it's like, well, I mean, with God it is possible.
It's difficult and impossible for you to do, but
Yeah.
it's possible with God. But then there's the idea. What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that even mean?
So does it mean I can be rich and it's possible, or what? Because it's almost as if it's saying two things, but it's probably not.
Well, I mean, obviously we can't make it on our own anyways, but yeah.
But at the very least, it's saying that it's definitely more difficult, or it's very difficult,
Yeah.
for someone who's rich to get to heaven. Essentially,
Yeah.
it's the passage indicates that whenever the case with God, it is possible, but it's going to be more difficult than someone who doesn't have all that stuff.
Because we're not invested in this world as much.
So the thought that comes to my mind when I read this story, and so it's a question. It's a question I asked a few weeks ago when we were going through this in youth group. Is are you rich?
I am. Multiple pairs of pants.
He has multiple pairs of pants. He's rich, fellas. You heard it here.
It's a quote
So-
from a show.
But you do have multiple pairs of pants, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. 4.
So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, so do we think most people, I asked that too, would probably say no. You said yes. maybe jokingly, but maybe not.
No, I'm serious.
You're serious, okay.
I have other stuff too.
He has other stuff too.
That's more valuable.
He has stuff that's more valuable. So if we think about it though, and the reason I bring this up is because I look at this passage and I'm like, if you think about the standard of living in the Bible times when Jesus said this, it's very different than today. And anyone in America, almost anyone, even someone we would consider, below the poverty line, they're living better than most or all people in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So our standard of living is a lot higher. Like we have indoor plumbing and food is never very far away.
Yeah. Even the people that are on welfare are probably doing better than some people. Well, they're doing better in some ways. And yeah, but basically you're saying that wealth back then was nothing compared to what we have now.
Yeah,
even the poor people.
Like right now, so nowadays, food is easier to come by, is more plentiful. We have to spend a lot less of our time working to get that food. We work a lot less hard. We have better housing and shelter, more clothing, better health care. All these things. We have
health care.
Well, we have. In some cases, we have health care. Yeah, in the past, there are a lot of times where it's like, well, you're going to die from this simple injury.
Yeah.
Oh, you got a cut? Sorry, that infection's going to kill you. So there's so many things nowadays where, if you really think about it, we are quite rich, depending if we're comparing to the standards of those days,
Yeah, it's because so I guess we could say that we are all in lifestyle inflation since then, and
yeah.
So as far as God is concerned, we're far above our needs. So basically nobody in America should be qualifies for somebody that should be worried about their basic needs.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the earlier verses he was talking about, if you have clothes and food, then you should be content. So basically all Christians in America qualify for that. So everybody should be content with what they have and be willing to share.
Right. So, so I'm not saying that in order to get it right, in order to not qualify as rich, we actually have to intentionally lower ourselves to that standard of living or anything. But what I am saying is we are all above it. We are, even the people in America who have very humble means, who are below the poverty line or whatever, they're probably living pretty good compared to this.
Yeah.
And yet, in America, we're taught that we need even more. We're taught that we need to seek better paying jobs and have huge houses and multiple cars and go on expensive vacations and things. And we're always looking for more and more and more. So it's not only do we have way more than back then, but none of us are content with what we have.
It's almost like the more we have, the more we want.
It's almost like that. It's almost like chasing wealth is chasing air.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a powerful thought, because when I think of that, then I have to say, okay, well, I think I would consider myself rich. So therefore, do I fall under this, where it is harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? Is that, I am confronted with the thought, is that applying to me, Most of us maybe wouldn't think of ourselves as rich, but
I don't know.
It's something we have to think about.
Yeah, we should, yeah.
Because, I have, we have our clothes and food taken off well before, and then we're going to the next thing. We're going to, what devices and technology and fancy things and we're buying more expensive clothes or cars or things like this. I'm not singling you out.
No, I don't buy expensive clothes.
But, it's just something we have to think about is, okay, is the rich talking about all of us?
Mm-hmm. I never thought about it that way. It's interesting. We could be comparatively as rich as the rich young ruler, as far as how much. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, on one hand, I would like to say that it's comparative, but it's not necessarily true.
Mm. Well, I mean, there's still people in the world who are living by much humbler means.
Yeah.
And regardless, so like I say, I'm not saying that in order to get into the right place, we have to intentionally lower our standard of living and do that, though, who knows, maybe. What I'm saying is, though, at the very least, we need to be content with what we've got.
Yes.
At the very least, we need to stop chasing wealth, stop chasing the American dream, and be content with the surplus that we already have, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Because I see in myself, definitely the temptation to basically follow the same trend as the rich young ruler, where, I have a lot of stuff that I'm maybe not willing to give up, or I have dreams and goals and things that I'm not willing to give up, when I already have more than enough. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Yeah, that kind of is a good segue into
what?
Minimalism.
Into minimalism.
So
take it away.
Basically, the reason that I wanted to do this topic is because I'm kind of interested in the whole idea of minimalism, and you are too as well, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think as Christians I think minimalism can be a tool to help us get a good grasp on our riches, I guess, and to not let it control us. It can be a tool to help us with that. So I think I'm still living at home, so it's kind of hard to quantify my minimalism, but I would consider myself a minimalist because I don't have anything that I, for the most part, like besides what fits in like a small dresser drawer, I don't have anything that I don't use regularly. Mm-hmm. I don't. And so I think it's kind of even though it kind of evolved out of I don't know, not really hippie, but like a secular movement. I definitely think it's even despite that, I think it's still a powerful tool for Christians to consider, to use to help them to visualize letting go of stuff.
Right. So I would not probably consider myself a minimalist, even though I have dreams and I want to get rid of stuff and have less stuff. But I probably wouldn't consider myself right now as one.
Yeah.
But so minimalism is kind of this thing that started as like a bunch of people realizing that stuff actually wasn't making them happy. Mm-hmm. It was actually taking away from their happiness, and they're focusing way too much on it because they got really caught up in the American dream and maybe were pretty successful or something, but then they realized that all that success didn't make them happy. So anyway, it's kind of a movement started based on that, but like with anything in the world, I think it's good for us to think about it from a spiritual perspective as well, and what are the potential spiritual benefits of adopting a more minimalistic lifestyle.
Yeah. And for me, it helps us to, having less stuff is one way where we can to work on not being hoarders or greedy, like this rich young ruler. What might have been, if he didn't have any of his stuff, he would be less likely to, or if he had been practicing that, it would probably be easier for him. And obviously, minimalism is not all of it. You still have money in your bank account, which is separate from minimalism for the most part. But even that part of, even like just the stuff in your home part, like the idea of not buying, is avoiding buying stuff can help you realize that your priority should not be in what you have in your house.
It's kind of a way of fighting back from the idea that we need more, and just instead saying, I don't need more.
Yeah.
I'm going to intentionally. Well, I'm going to be content with less. Essentially, is I'm going to have what I need and then stop getting more.
Mm-hmm.
So it very much goes along with the idea of trying to be content with what we need instead of chasing everything we don't need.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, though, that there's also kind of a danger in minimalism, because I think in some cases it's kind of used as just a different form of almost a different form of like greed or worldliness. Or at least this is what I see sometimes in myself, is that sometimes the desire to have less is maybe because I want to spend less money, for instance.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying minimalism only covers half of it, because you have the stuff in your house and you also have the money in your bank account. So you can't just be generous with the stuff in your house. You also have to be generous with the money in your bank account.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's only half the battle, but it's a good start, because you can visualize the idea of letting go, getting rid of each piece of stuff, each item that you don't need, is a way to realize that you're letting go, and then you have to also apply that to your liquid asset or your money that's not in stuff, your liquid assets, for that to be fully work. So like the modern minimalism only talks about the stuff part, doesn't talk about the money part, because that's a foreign concept too.
So, right. So it's kind of a practice of the act of letting go, and to me, I especially see it as a way of being content, and it's what we should be seeking to do, right? Is just being content. And if we really think about it, most of us probably have all the stuff we need already.
Oh yeah.
So why keep buying? Like, not so much to an extent of you, because you haven't you're still living at home, so you haven't moved out. You don't have all the things that you would need if you were actually living on your own.
Yeah.
But I can say that I have what I need.
Yeah, you have enough dishes to eat on. You have enough clothes, and you have something to sit on at your house.
There's always a floor somewhere.
And you have a floor.
And I have a floor.
And so
the thought is, though, if I kind of adopt this mindset of I don't need more, and also I probably shouldn't want more. If I kind of adopt a minimalistic mindset, is, well, what do I need to buy?
Yeah.
Because we get caught up in all the things we want to buy, right? But when we start thinking like this, it all of a sudden becomes, well, I'm pretty good.
Yeah. That's the cool thing about minimalism, is it's completely counterculture, but we can take that take that counterculture spirit and apply it into a Christian lifestyle, and be like, you know what? I should separate from the world and this whole stuff craze. As we all know, America has slipped into a consumer
very consumerist. Consumerism is the big thing.
Yeah, consumeristic society in the last
century.
It's, as we've been having more excess wealth, we've been coming more and more, and now we have social media and ads, and all that stuff contributes to it. And as Christians, we should be able to step out of that and I think in this case we should take the counter approach. And I think that we didn't really. I think that kind of everybody got swept up into that, and even Christians. And I think minimalism is kind of showing us that you can take a counter approach to that. You can just go against the flow with this whole consumeristic stuff, because it's dangerous for Christians to fall into it, because
consumerism is not godly.
It's not.
The chase for getting stuff is very much, well, we've talked about the chasing after riches, but essentially riches, possessions, stuff. It's all talking about the same thing. So when we have that consumeristic mindset, when we're chasing the American dream, that is, it's the root of all evil, or it's the root of all sorts of evil.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous thing, and it's really not something we as Christians should be caught up in.
Yeah, Yeah, it's of this world. It's not of heaven.
So I think, thinking all the minimalist as far as Christian life goes, what I think we all need to do to some extent is to apply minimalism in some way to our own lives. And when I say that, I don't mean like the clean, neutral colored rooms and like sparse decorating that you'll see minimalists on like YouTube or stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking where it's a different sense of decoration and it's just owning fewer things. The focus is on owning fewer things. What I'm saying is we should maybe apply minimalism where we're not thinking about necessarily owning fewer things or thinking about things at all. We're just trying to be content with what we need.
Yeah.
We're just cutting loose from that consumeristic American mindset.
The old counterculture. We need to be counterculture in this. Well, actually, basically everything, but especially this.
Yeah.
We need to complete the counterculture, and we have to realize that the culture is going the opposite direction we should be going in. And I think many people have not realized that.
Mm-hmm.
It came so gradually that we never thought about it.
Well, most of us, nowadays, we're born into it,
Yeah.
We're just born into this idea of like, you're chasing money, you're chasing stuff and success.
Yeah, and as stuff gets updated faster and faster, we have more and more ads everywhere.
Ads are terrible.
And there's so much social manipulation going on through media.
Trying to convince you that you need stuff.
Yeah. And you have to recognize that they're working against you. They're actively working against you whether you realize it or not. And so
right.
It's just an awareness thing and be like we have to realize that we need to stand against this.
Mm-hmm.
Not let us get swept into it.
Right. It's well, it's just one of the things we have to do, kind of.
Yeah.
Because if we get caught up with the way most people are, and we end up, having garages full of stuff so that we can't park our cars in it, for instance, I've seen that so many times. Okay.
Oh, it's so sad.
And numerous other examples. There's like, somebody will have like a 2 or 3 car garage, and they'll be parking outside exclusively.
And in Minnesota.
Yeah, and in places where you would definitely want to use that garage. And I've never had a garage in my life, and I'm like, dude, people. Anyway. That's
so sad if you think about it. And you've worked as a mover before.
Yeah, so yes, I had a job where I was helping people move their stuff into a moving truck. But even then, I've helped people a lot of times besides that. And every time I'm just hit hard with these feelings of I get very cynical and I'm like, man, I just hate stuff. Like every time, because I just realize
people have a lot of stuff.
Like you maybe don't notice it when it's all put in the house and it's in cupboards and most of it's hidden and organized. Yeah. But once you start carrying boxes and pieces of furniture and you start seeing trucks fill or storage units fill or garages fill, then you start realizing,
yeah,
I don't want to ever be like this.
You know what's a fun little game when you're helping people move? Just imagining, like, you're just like, this box trash, this box keep, this box, just play a little game in your head. It's always fun.
I haven't thought about that.
As you're carrying stuff out, like, okay, is this trash or is this actually useful?
So that's something you should do with other people. Like, so you're thinking of that as like, okay, I'm carrying this box out. Would I keep this or not? Or so.
It's a fun game.
Interesting.
It kicks up your cynical aspect.
Oh, I don't need anything to kick up my cynicism because when I'm helping people move, I'm already very cynical.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm sure we've all helped people move, and it's like this big, like almost.
I just never want to be like that.
Yeah.
But then, that's the natural progression. Is if you keep getting stuff, that stuff goes somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, do you have any other thoughts on minimalism?
Well, there's two sides to it. There's the crazy, or like the weird, almost religious side of it. And then there's the practical, everyday counterculture side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, as Christians, we just want one of those parts of it.
Right. And it's not so. And we're not specific. It's not the counterculture that itself that we want. It's not the going counterculture for the sake of going counterculture. It's because the way culture is bad.
Yes.
And we should not be that way.
Yeah.
We need to be different. And so it's not, we're not getting rid of the stuff for the sake of getting rid of stuff or to be more organized or anything like that. We're doing it because we want to have our lives less cluttered and thus more open and free to do things that are important, like serve God.
Getting rid of stuff for the sake of learning to not care about your possessions as much, and to learn to let go, and to learn that this is not about your money is not or you shouldn't be thinking about what you can buy when you get a new paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to let go of the you aspect of your money.
Right. So I want to look up another passage real quick that
I can read it.
Okay, so Luke 12:13 through 21.
Oh, this conversation has been giving me new ideas for podcast topics.
Podcast or video?
Podcast. 12:13 through 21.
Yep. And so this passage is very much goes into the ideas of don't chase riches, and later on it gets into contentment again.
Yes. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me as judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions." And he told this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and I'll store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him that night, "You fool, this is the very night your life will be demanded from you. Then you will get what you have prepared for yourself. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God."
So the question I want to ask you after reading that is, what was this what was this rich man's fault? Where did he go wrong?
He was trying to take his inheritance.
No, so the rich man in the story.
Oh, the rich man in the story. Oh, yeah. That's a good question, because as part of American culture, that can seem like a natural thought progression, but it's kind of an eye-opener because it shouldn't be.
So did he go wrong by being successful?
No, I think he went wrong by wanting to. Well, he thinking that he would store it for himself and eat, drink, and be merry. That's where he went wrong. He should have thought more along the lines of, I don't know, helping others, being generous with his wealth.
So the way I see it is, his main fault is he gets all this stuff. Essentially, it's grain essentially, but think of it as wealth. And then his reaction is, I'm going to build myself bigger barns so that I can have more wealth. And then I'll be happy for many years to come. And then he dies that night. So his fault really is chasing wealth, essentially. Is not the fact that he had wealth wasn't the problem. The fact that he was setting his eyes on it and he was self-confident that it was what was going to get him through. Okay. So the rich man's, where he went wrong was essentially then just being self-confident and in his own riches and in chasing the riches and disregarding the fact that one day he was going to die, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And
can't take it with you.
And I like what Jesus says there. So you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now, who will own what you have prepared? And there's a good question for anyone, right? It's like, you have stuff. Who's going to own it when you're dead? And if you think about that question, then instantly being rich is maybe less enticing. Because you're going to end anyway. But anyway, so is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So his fault was storing up treasure for himself, but he wasn't trying to store up treasure, heavenly treasure, Here we go back to the idea of treasure in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Is we should be, so in your video you talked about the temptation to chase wealth. We should be chasing spiritual wealth, essentially. Is we should be that's the thing we should be striving toward. It's there's nothing wrong with money in and of itself, besides the fact that it can be dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
The issue is when we start chasing it.
Yeah.
Instead of chasing God.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought that up because it kind of reminds me of like a youth or Bible teacher I had when I was younger. Used to talk about like holy points.
Holy points?
I'm not sure if you've heard that expression, but it's like
I haven't.
it's like a youth or like a kids class idea that if you do certain good things, you get like holy points.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm familiar with the concept.
Yeah. And it'll be like you get like, I don't know, like a coin up in heaven or something. But it's actually not totally false.
No.
That concept isn't false. It's like there are different instances where Jesus said to him, Jesus will say like, because you have done this, you will have great riches in heaven or something.
Treasure in heaven.
Or something like that. So it is true that if the good things we do come back to us in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of had a mindset for a while that basically heaven was going to be a socialist society.
Whoa.
No, just kidding.
Whoa there.
Well, no.
Heaven is going to be like the section of like a arcade or like Chuck E. Cheese or something where you turn in all your tickets and tokens and buy stuff.
No.
Where you spend your whole life trying to get as many tickets so you can buy stuff in heaven.
No. Well, it's I guess the first thing you have to remember is that heaven is not like earth. You don't have to worry about taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, I know.
So I guess that's a prerequisite to this conversation. You don't actually need to buy stuff in heaven.
No. I think once you're there, you're pretty well taken care of.
But it is an interesting thing to think about. Like, basically, what you should get out of this is that the good things we do here on Earth are not going to go unnoticed.
Mm-hmm. So, like the rich man, the young rich ruler, giving up all of his wealth, he would have given up a lot in this life, right? But it was going to be repaid for eternity, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is much more worth it.
Yeah. And it's easy to feel like that if we are passable, it doesn't matter what we do beyond that, but it does matter what we do beyond that. And yeah, it's hard to feel like the riches in heaven are as real as the riches on earth, but they are. They're more real.
Mm-hmm.
That it's even though you can't feel it and see it now, it's like you're giving up something now for something greater because you are, but it's hard to visualize that. But
mm-hmm.
it's part of the whole package with faith, or believing in heaven is believing that you will be rewarded for what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's written that way because as humans, that's kind of what we can understand.
We understand rewards. We understand cause and effect.
Yeah. But
reward and punishment is what we understand.
Yeah, so I feel like that's kind of why it's written that way. But it's good to remember that the stuff what we get in heaven is just as real, well, actually more real than what we have on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's easy to feel like what we have in front of us is real, but what we have in heaven is even more real.
Right. And it's also eternal.
Yeah,
which is good.
It's also eternal.
It doesn't burn up in the end. We don't get to the end and then have to ask ourselves who will own what we have prepared. Looking down further in Luke chapter 12, which we don't necessarily go over, but it starts going into, I'll just read a couple verses. And he said to his disciples, "For this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, or for your body as to what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing." And then it starts talking about the ravens and how God feeds them, and the flowers, how they are clothed better than Solomon, and essentially saying, what?
Go ahead.
Oh. Essentially saying that we don't need to worry about any needs in life, essentially. Is that, first of all, God's going to take care of them. And secondly, we don't need to be... Well, actually, so further down, and do not seek what you will eat and drink, and do not keep worrying. For all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you need these things. So when I read that verse, I think of America. Here there's all these things that we're all eagerly seeking, that we're going through the whole rat race to try to obtain. And this is saying,
do not worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Don't seek it. Just, you'll be fine.
Just chill. Just float on the ocean of... I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to understand that on a practical level, but well, for me it is anyway. It's something I should probably study more. But what does that really mean? As far as, I don't think it means that we shouldn't be pursuing money at all.
Well, I mean, when we get back to the reason why we have jobs is to support ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So God is providing for us through the job that we have.
That's true. That's probably, yeah.
So it's essentially it's saying, this is more for people who would be prone to worrying about whether or not their basic needs are going to be met. Maybe I'm going to lose my job. Maybe I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. This is essentially saying, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
God's got it covered.
God gave you this first job and give you another job.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it doesn't mean that you can just sit at home and wait, but it does mean that it's not in our hands anyways.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like God's got his side of the bargain and we've got our side, right?
Yeah.
We can't just sit on our hands and, okay, God, where's my stuff? We have, sometimes he provides through our action.
Mm-hmm. But he gives us he gives us the strength, and he sends us the opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And all the stuff that happens behind the scene that we maybe never know that will happen, how it worked out,
Yeah.
So the end of this section, I also like. Sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near, nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Or you could flip that around and say, for where your heart is, that's where you're going to put your treasure, right? So it's a really great kind of almost synopsis on the passage, because if we're seeking riches in this life, that's saying that our heart is for this life. If we're seeking riches in heaven, that's where our heart is,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just kind of, it's interesting to think about, what is treasure here on earth? Because you were talking earlier about how we are comparatively so much richer than people. Our what we consider poor is so much better than what they were back then. But even still, I think you could separate out, having a modest amount of money and having treasure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
I consider myself to be well taken care of, but I don't consider myself to have treasure, really.
Right.
Because I think the difference would be, if you had treasure, that would be either money that is not needed, kind of, or stuff that you had just to make yourself feel rich, to like a fancy car or a really nice house or something like that.
Yeah, so it could be talking about possessions. It could be talking about bank account and.
But I think there is a difference between like having money and having treasure. I think treasure is more like money that makes you feel rich.
Well, so
almost.
So think about it like. So it doesn't necessarily have to make you feel rich. So think about it this way: all the stuff we have in life and all of our money is kind of like, think of it as like a giant heap. It's like our hoard of treasure. Like all the stuff that we accumulate and won't let go of. That's kind of like the treasure that we're hoarding. And whether or not we, explicitly get joy out of it or see it as treasure, it's stuff that we're kind of building up for ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just like earlier in this passage, the rich man who's, building bigger barns to store up stuff for himself and so he can enjoy his life. He's storing up all this stuff for himself. That's his treasure. He's worried about that almost exclusively. He's not worried about, whatever you want to call it, holy points, brownie points. He's not worried about how his mound of treasure is looking like in heaven.
Yeah.
And so for us, we think of so to think of treasure in earth, it's the things that we chase. It's the things that we count as valuable, right?
I guess that's a good definition of treasure. Like it's what we go after,
or what we see as valuable.
Yeah.
So that could be, maybe for some people it's just straight up money and they just want to keep their money and never spend it. For other people it's stuff or property or experiences, or the list goes on.
Yeah. It's I guess it's a better way to look at it. It's where your treasure is, where your heart is, and your heart is where treasure is.
Mm-hmm. And so our treasure in heaven is all the good deeds that we've done, all the things we've done in sincerity for all the service we've rendered to God or to those around us. That's the stuff that we should be building up. And I really like the imagery. I guess nobody nowadays really uses money belts mostly, but it says, "Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven." So I guess a more modern thing would be like a wallet or something. A wallet that doesn't wear out, is we're storing our money in a place where it's secure,
Yeah.
It's good imagery. There are so many good passages on possessions and money and stuff. I don't think we could even cover all of them.
Yeah, so we could probably start to wrap up if we wanted.
So I have a couple passages here which are kind of like what our response should be, considering all of the stuff that we've talked about and all the stuff that we haven't talked about. What should our response be to possessions and wealth, and both in having it and in chasing after it, or how all that should work out? The few verses. So earlier we talked about we were in 1 Timothy 6-10. How we should, contentment is very important. The couple verses after that, so 1 Timothy 6:11 and 12, say, "But flee from these things, you man of God, and pursue righteousness, godliness." So it says flee from these things as in flee from the pursuit of riches. Is essentially what I was talking about. "You man of God, and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called, and you made the good confession in the presence of many witnesses." So it's saying, just flee. You were talking about why would we want to put ourselves in a position of danger as far as being wealthy or rich?
Yeah.
So it's saying you don't want to stand right next to it. You don't want to stand right next to the fire. Flee from it.
Yeah.
And pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, gentleness.
Yeah, because we are fleeing from danger. We're fleeing from something that can trap us and ensnare us and cause us eternal harm. And so we should think of it like like someone's chasing us with a sword.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different. It's intimate danger that's behind us. We got to go out, get out.
Mm-hmm. And so on one hand, we're getting away from the danger. We're getting away from the potential stumbling blocks. And two, we're moving towards the things that we really should be embodying, the things we should be chasing. Things that are not so much... They're not possessions. They're not necessarily tangible. They're character traits, really. You know, you think of righteousness, faith, love. These are things that more or less... They're things we embody. They're not so much things that we have, right?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because those things are part of us and not our possessions. So those things are eternal if you think about it that way. And so it is the same thing as going after eternal treasures or laying up eternal treasures because we're improving ourselves, which is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And even on earth, those things can feel like riches. Like you will feel rich if you have all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And
a different kind of rich.
A different kind of rich, and it's also a richness that it's eternal.
It's richness towards God. So yeah. If we back up a little bit, not back up, zoom out, bigger picture, Christianity as a whole. Throughout the New Testament and the New Covenant, there is very much this kind of contrast between fleshly things and spiritual things, between the flesh and the spirit, right? Between actions that we do, like the law, and between motives, reasons, thoughts. So we take this verse, and at least the way I understand it is, it's not so much whether or not we are chasing riches or chasing riches or trying to be more minimalistic. The point is not the physical thing that we're doing, right? The point is the spiritual significance of it, right?
Yeah.
The point is why we are doing it, and are we doing it with are we living our lives embodying these good characteristics, Are we really being righteous or godly, or are we just straight up chasing stuff? Or getting rid of stuff, even?
I think I have a good illustration for that.
Go ahead.
So I'm sure heard of like Gary V, right?
Not ringing a bell.
Oh, okay, never mind. Basically, there's this hustle culture. Like, there's just people that are like, you got to hustle, get up early, work hard. That's Gary V. But anyway,
that's a lot of people.
Well, he embodied that. Basically, but as Christians, and some people have this habit of getting up early to do devotions, because spending time in prayer and Bible reading, that's like, it's like the same thing as, it's like building up eternal treasure, just like getting up early and working on your business or whatever, is building up earthly treasure. So it's kind of a good contrast. Like, if our treasure is in heaven, we should be spending more of our working time working towards that treasure.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be hustling. We should be working hard, but not for money. It should be for eternal treasure. That's why you see, it's kind of cool I'm not sure if you know people like this, but people that get up really early in the morning to do devotions.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing as it's equivalent to the people that get up really early to work, except for their treasure actually matters.
Right.
And if
so
you
we need to be hustling for the right things.
Yeah.
Spiritual hustle.
Spiritual hustle, yeah. It's always cool to see people do that. And because you don't see, they're not, those people usually aren't really wealthy, but you can see the treasure in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I know somebody right off the top of my head, and probably multiple people, but
it makes a big difference to do those instead of daily physical things, daily spiritual things
Mm-hmm.
that build towards a much stronger spiritual outcome, both in this life and in the next.
Yeah, but it's kind of like it's another example of how you have it's a spiritual equivalent of a worldly culture, I guess. But like as yeah.
So, one of the lights just went out. That's fun.
The battery died.
So, let's wrap this up, and let's do something new. Let's do this. So, let's each give one, I guess, kind of challenge or piece of advice. One thing that I think that you think we should take away. The people watching should take away from all of this.
Mm.
And then I'll also give one.
Okay. Wow. So you put you on the spot.
I can go first if you want.
Go ahead.
So, so having talked about all of this and done additional reading that we unfortunately couldn't get to, the thing I would say that that all of you watching and we should strive towards is definitely being content and finding ways that we can be content with what we have and really just focus on the things that we need, and then beyond that, not be so worried about it. So that's one challenge is be content and don't be so worried about having enough so that you can spend it on yourself. Just be content.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'd go off. Our last thought as far as is recognize or I guess my challenge was that we should all examine where our treasure is at.
Mm-hmm.
And the different ways you could do this is look at your time and look at your thoughts, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That's really going to tell you how much time are you putting towards
Mm-hmm.
the treasure of this world, and how much time you're putting towards your treasure in heaven. How much of your thoughts, are thinking about money, and how much of the thoughts are thinking about your walk with God. So I guess that's how we should be, and everybody else should examine ourselves, and I think using those two metrics.
Right. So compare time you spend thinking about God and thinking about money, and find a way that you can I don't know why I'm holding up 3. 2, find a way that you can be content and figure out how you can be content with what you have and not keep striving for more and more and more.
Yep.
So on that note, this has been the 4th episode of the Salt of the Earth podcast.
More coming soon. Do you have an idea what your video is going to be next week? Or can you give us a sneak peek? No. Maybe. I have lots of ideas. My problem is never having an idea. It's having too many ideas. Okay.
Find out next time.
Oh, I was just going to see if we were going to get a trailer from you, but I guess not.
No.
Okay.
The trailer from my next video is be salty.